What is going on YouTube? Gabmus here and welcome to the 39th episode of the Tech Pills bi-weekly live stream. So let's just appreciate for a moment that 2020 has passed and we are now in a new year. Hopefully this will be better than the last one. As we all know, last year was pretty rough. So let's jump right to the first news of today. Here we are with the first Raspberry Pi class single board computer built around a RISC V CPU. And just quickly jump to the chat. Gumbo says, hi Gumbo, good morning from California. I love your videos. Can't wait until we get some customer level RISC V. I enjoy RISC V more than ARM over licenses. Yes, that's one big point of RISC V, and we're just going to talk about this right now. So what are we talking about here? It was a couple of days ago, I think, that a new single board computer has been announced. It's called the Beagle V or the Beagle 5, depending on how you want to pronounce that V. So let's jump right to the gallery and see what we're talking about here. So here it is. This is the Beagle 5. Let's call it Beagle 5. It's a collaboration between BeagleBoard, one of the more important single board computer manufacturers out there, along with Pine 64 and I mean Raspberry Pi Foundation, Odroid, all those companies. BeagleBoard is one of those companies making single board computers out there. Of course, up until now they've only done ARM, as far as I know. But it makes sense that one of those big, single board computer players jumps into a project like this. And for this one, it was BeagleBoard. Again, this is a collaboration between BeagleBoard, Star5, and Seed with 3 E's. I never heard of those last two companies. To my understanding, Star5 is a company that produces the actual silicon, and Seed being like another company that makes other hardware, peripheral devices, integrations, so that sort of stuff. So apparently all of these players are pretty well experienced as far as making hardware goes. Let's look at this little single board computer for a moment here. So this is the actual SBC itself. It looks like Raspberry Pi, and that's not really not a big surprise. They all look pretty much the same. It's got some pretty interesting hardware, but at the same time, it got me a little perplexed as far as some of the hardware choices go. And here's another picture showing some of the hardware in highlight. It's really showing what's inside the actual SoC. So this is a dual-core Sci5 U74. So the actual silicon is created by Sci5. It's probably the largest RISC V CPU or silicon manufacturer out there, and it's got it's a dual core, 1.5 gigahertz. I'm not sure how to compare that number because it's not like I have much experience with performance as far as like the RISC V architecture goes, but it sounds pretty decent for the kind of device this is. We got a Vision DSP Tensilica VP6 for computing vision. Probably it was they were supposed to say computer vision. This is already starting to sound kind of specific. And another thing we have here is NVDLA engine. So you may mistake this for something that NVIDIA does, and in fact, you would be right. This is actually an NVIDIA technology. NVDLA stands for NVIDIA Deep Learning Architecture. So it's kind of a processing component silicon stuff that is more oriented towards deep learning and artificial intelligence or all that kind of stuff. And also we have a built-in ISP and NNE. So I've never heard of those acronyms before, and I study computer science, so I'm not sure what to think about that. The only thing that I could find about ISP is that it's probably image signal processor. That would make sense. I'm not really too sure about it. And as far as the rest of the hardware goes, we got 4 USB 3.0 ports, an audio port, and a full-size RJ45 Ethernet jack that's 1 gigabit in speed. HDMI 1.4, kind of weird. We're at 2.1 as far as the HDMI standard goes, but I think that maybe you're not really too interested in like having something more than 1080p output from this little guy here. And I'm going to talk about why in a second. We have a 40-pin header, so GPIO header. Let's jump to the last image here. As you see here, it's very similar to what you would find on a Raspberry Pi. And again, USB-C for power. And we have a couple of CMOS sensor ports over here. It's those two like vertical modules here. It's probably for connecting cameras or other kind of sensors to the single board computer, as well as a DSI port. I think this is a display standard, so to connect actual external displays. We have onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which is always nice. And this is the full spec sheet. If you wanted to learn more about it, it's got video decoder and encoders built into the hardware. Pretty cool. I mean, it can do 4K 60 as far as decoding and encoding goes, and 1080p 30. So there's that. the hardware itself, it's not bad. I mean, it's got some pretty specific stuff going on, and I want to talk about what this product. I mean, what kind of customer wants this product? Because this is not your typical single board computer. If you look at Raspberry Pis and all the other similar SBCs out there, you immediately understand that they're designed to be like sort of general purpose computing devices, and yeah, they are limited in some sort of way. They're not like the most powerful devices out there, but they do have the capability of being run as full-on, I mean, kind of desktop replacement computers. This thing here, I'm not sure if this is their intention. It's got some pretty specific deep learning AI and image recognition hardware on it. So I'm pretty sure that this is actually intended for like an evaluation platform for use of the RISC V architecture in embedded IoT devices that do some AI stuff on board, like image recognition, something like that. Maybe like a super smart surveillance camera. I don't know. Industrial applications, there are countless of those, and I think this is more oriented towards that. I don't think this is like something a consumer would buy, and for all intents and purposes, this will work as a standard computer because it's what it is. It's just a particular different architecture, and one that we didn't have much experience with up until this point. And this is probably like the first step in actually bringing the RISC V architecture to the masses. I'm not sure if this is the best way to achieve that. I would have preferred to see something with less like specific hardware, like this NVDLA thing. I would have preferred not to have this on board, just because it would have kept the cost down, and probably the space that you would otherwise use for this silicon could have been used for like more cores or faster cores, or I don't know. It's just something that I'm not sure it will be useful for the end user, for a standard consumer, or like a geek or nerd, or like a thinker that likes to play around with these kind of things. If you are a student and if you are studying like artificial intelligence, if you're working like on like projects that have small devices capable of doing artificial intelligence, this is probably something you want to keep a close eye on. But I'm not sure if the RISC V architecture itself is so important for this kind of thing. You could have done the same thing with ARM, or well, x86 if you have like a low power enough and powerful enough, at the same time x86 CPU or SoC that you could use. It doesn't really matter the architecture here. It's nice to see it being done with RISC V, but again, I don't think it was necessary for the kind of device that they're creating. This is particularly oriented towards a specific market. But again, it's the sign that there's interest out there for the RISC V as an architecture. And as far as like devices that you can actually buy go, this is probably the first thing we will be able to put our hands on. So this is pretty exciting, despite the fact that it's pretty specific. And it's nice to see like this new architecture finally coming into the market in one form or another. The only thing that I wanted to mention, other than this, is the fact that the price is still unknown, so we don't know what this thing is gonna cost. Hopefully it's gonna be around like $50 or something like that. If it was higher than that, I'm not sure it would be so much of a great value, considering the Raspberry Pi 4 is out there, and I think it's more supported as far as software and everything else goes. Even if it's just ARM and it's not RISC V, I mean, it's still, if you're looking for something general purpose, maybe if this is like $50 or less, it's going to be a steal. It's going to be pretty great. But if it's more than that, you're moving too close into Raspberry Pi territory there. And I would suggest you look at the Raspberry Pi 4 8GB model instead. Another thing that I wanted to mention is there has been quite some hype on the RISC V architecture because it's open hardware, it's open source, fully open source. The specification is out there. Everyone can build RISC V CPUs or silicon of any other kind without having to pay for a license, as far as I understand. But just remember that just because it's open source, it doesn't mean that it's going to be necessarily like Linux as far as like standard Linux friendly. We've seen the same thing with ARM. If you look at ARM as an architecture, it's actually a lot more open compared to something like x86. In fact, there are many manufacturers out there, silicon manufacturers, doing ARM CPUs and SoCs of various kinds. The only big problem with ARM is that there's no like strong standard that these companies, this silicon follows, and there's no standardization around a particular set of features or a particular way that it should work. And this makes it just that yes, you do have a standard platform that's ARM and that has some binary compatibility, like a CPU with another CPU. They're both ARM, they're gonna run the same code. Yes, that's true to some extent, but at the same time, all ARM CPUs are quite different one from another. And the same thing already does happen with RISC V. For the few CPUs that are out there, for the few models that like Sci5 does, they have pretty different capabilities. And as far as Sci5 goes, I'm pretty confident on the fact that they will always be producing like open and Linux friendly, like standard Linux friendly, upstream Linux friendly CPUs. But I'm not sure if once the standard catches on, if it catches on, I'm not sure that we will see what we're expecting to see from this architecture. And what I would want to expect from it is a completely standard architecture, so that you have like 10 or 15 or whatever different manufacturers making RISC V CPUs, and all those CPUs run just fine with an upstream Linux kernel. I'm not sure if this is gonna happen, like because of the fact that this architecture is so much open, and you can modify it. If you're a manufacturer, if you have the ability to do so, you can modify the architecture. You can take like the schematics for an SoC and build on top of it and add modules and different computing capabilities. And this alone makes it non-standard. You can even tweak or change the architecture so it is no more compatible, not compatible with like mainstream RISC V anymore. So that's a possibility of something that could happen with RISC V. And just wanted to throw this out there because I know that many people, myself included, are really hyped about RISC V, but we still have to keep this in mind. We need an open architecture, but we need a Linux friendly and standard, as standard as possible architecture to build on top of. Hopefully RISC V is this architecture, will be this architecture, but up to this point, we don't really know. We really have to see more devices coming into the market, and we really have to see how easy or how hard it is for kernel maintainers, and I mean, even the companies themselves should provide upstream support for their devices to the Linux kernel. If that happens, we are in a very good route. If it doesn't, not sure what to think. We could have something very similar to ARM on our hands, a non-standard mess of different products that all behave differently. Let's hope this is not the case. So, moving on to the next news of today. Wine 6.0 has been released, and wine has never been more relevant. With Proton shipping to thousands of Steam on Linux customers, it became a synonym with Linux gaming. The momentum behind the whole project seems to be ever growing, and with this new major release, we got a lot of new features. And of course, this is also thanks to the contributions from both Valve and Collabora and, of course, Code Weavers. Everyone that's working on a wine project right now made this possible and keeps making like the big changes and big leap of improvements that we're seeing in wine possible. So let's actually see what's going on with this new release. There are a couple interesting new features. So the first big one is Wine D3D. The default implementation of Direct 3D or DirectX on Wine now has a Vulkan backend offering similar capabilities to the DXVK and VKD3D projects. And you may not be familiar with the fact that Wine already has like a built-in DirectX implementation. It was previously built on top of OpenGL, and it wasn't really particularly great. But of course, before the XVK was a thing, Linux gamers that wanted to play like Windows-only titles, we had to rely on that. And I can tell you, I played countless games on Wine D3D. And while there are some cases when it works pretty decently, in some other cases, it's actually pretty much a dumpster fire. So having this new Vulkan backend will probably make Wine D3D a lot better, maybe possibly a viable alternative to the XVK. Of course, if you're gaming, you probably want to stick to the XVK and VKD3D because those are built specifically for gaming. But for other kinds of applications, Wine D3D, as far as I know, tries to create a one-to-one as close as possible as implementation of the DirectX API on top of a, well, the Wine ecosystem infrastructure, whatever. So their goals are pretty different. While the XVK and VKD3D try to make you run games as best as they can, even working around hacky things and bugs and things that developers are actually doing wrong, there are many cases where games implement actually borderline illegal instructions for DirectX that end up working because they rely on bugs in DirectX that, the Wine developers and everyone around Wine, everyone that wants to re-implement the spec needs to actually replicate those bugs in order to make some games work, which is pretty mind-boggling. So Wine D3D, again, different scope compared to those other two projects, but we're seeing a Vulkan backend. Possibly, hopefully, we'll see lots of improvements from this switch. Of course, changing the graphical API alone doesn't really do too much, but I know for a fact that OpenGL is practically dead, and Vulkan is the new thing. It's the new kid on the block, and it will probably be able to receive more contributions, like faster development, better development. So pretty excited for that. And another big change is support for Direct Show and the Media Foundation frameworks, possibly allowing many in-game media and videos to work out of the box on Wine. And this is something that it really sounds trivial, but it's really not, because many games rely on this Media Foundation framework codecs for in-game videos or whatever, cutscenes, and most of the time they don't work in Wine because, well, I'm not really sure of the reason why, because I'm pretty sure that they could re-implement or include those codecs into Wine, but I know that there are some some legal concerns regarding those codecs because they're proprietary and they are subject to licensing. So I'm pretty sure that just including like the binaries is something that they could not do. It's kind of a gray area. In fact, you as a user, you can include those binaries, those libraries yourself using like mf install or mfplat install. There are a couple of projects that actually do exactly this, allow you to actually see in-game videos, in-game footage using the Media Foundation codecs and framework by just running a script and pointing it to your Wine prefix. If you're a user, you're just doing this as a user, it's really fine. No one is going to really sue you. But if you're doing this as a big entity that's distributing software and you're redistributing legally non-redistributable software, that's kind of concerning. So probably pretty sure that they could not do that. So the fact that they are now supporting these Media Foundation framework codecs probably means that they either re-implemented the codecs or the technology around them themselves, or they acquired a license or a special permission to include those into Wine. Either way, I'm happy to see this kind of progress, as these are actually one of the big stoppers as far as Linux gaming goes, apart from like the whole anti-cheat debacle. That's a whole different kind of worms. If an experienced user like myself, I could easily, and in fact I have installed those frameworks manually, but that's something that your typical user will not want to do, or is just not capable of doing. So having this support included into Wine is something that really will bring Linux support for many games up a notch, in my opinion, or at least hopefully. Another interesting addition, and I didn't really find too much about this, is the addition of a new USB kernel driver built around libUSB. Again, as I said, I unfortunately couldn't find much more information about it, apart from, well, what it is. It's a USB driver built around libUSB, but I'm not sure to what extent this USB driver is capable of. Possibly, although I think I would have seen a lot more noise around this, it could mean that we could be able to run like Windows-only drivers for USB peripherals like mice and keyboards and headsets and whatever that's typically only available on Windows via Wine, something that was previously impossible to do because of the way Wine works. Maybe, possibly, we will be able to do that with 6.0. I'm not sure, again, because I couldn't find much information about this. Probably could also mean that we have better support for like hot plugging controllers or something. I don't know, I'm not really sure. But anyway, pretty interesting stuff. And it's a major release, 6.0. I'm really happy that they have achieved this goal. And it's kind of stunning if you think about it, how great something like Wine is. And Microsoft tried to create a compatibility layer around the Linux APIs, and Linux is open source, and they failed with the Windows subsystem for Linux. They failed miserably. And in fact, they had to resort to using a virtual machine, to use an hypervisor with a full virtualized Linux instance to be able to actually create a proper Linux environment around Windows subsystem for Linux. So the fact that the Wine project in a black box has been able to create a compatibility layer around the Windows and Win32 APIs and have it work this well, because let's be honest, it's basically magic. It isn't supposed to work, but it does. To me, it's magic. It's one of those projects that it's so complex, and what it achieves is so weird and strange, and it strangely works so well most of the time. At least I cannot wrap my head around how they managed to do this. So congratulations to the Wine team for the 6.0 release, and I hope we'll see more from them, more new changes, new features, and improvements as we keep seeing over the years. All right, let's jump right to the next news of today. From now on, LTS versions of Qt will only be offered to paying customers. This is something of bad news. It's actually a pretty bad news, and everyone is talking about this, and I thought I could give you my 2 cents about it myself. So as of recording this, Qt version 5.15 has effectively become closed source. This means that the newer versions going forward of 5.15 will be closed source. The currently open source one will keep remaining open source, with the first commercial only patch 5.15.3 to be released in February. The Qt company has followed through with their plan of only offering the LTS version of Qt as part of their commercial license. This news coincides with the release of the new and improved Qt 6, regularly distributed as open source software, so you may ask, why is this a big deal? Can't we all just port to Qt 6? Well, yes, but actually no. Moving from one major release of a library to another is no easy task, and a library as complex as a toolkit, and given how complex and big Qt is, it's even a bigger task. It's incredibly, it takes an incredible amount of work just to port from one major version to another. And considering that they've done quite a few API changes, it's not really like an afternoon project, particularly for bigger projects. In software development, when the first number in the version of a software release changes, it means that most of everything is different now. So the first number, or the major version number, typically means when it changes, typically means the API has changed, or the programming interface has changed. This means that the functions are not the same, that the place where you find this or that thing has changed. And of course, it's not like across the whole entirety of the library, but typically when there's a major release change like this, it means that it's quite pervasive. So it makes sense that it's not like an overnight task, something you can do in a matter of hours or days or even weeks probably. Plus, consider that Qt 6 still doesn't support many of the add-on modules and external libraries that are widely used in Qt 5.15. And the huge majority of projects will probably start consider porting around version 6.2 anyway, because there are there's talk about breaking ABI changes, so it's not API, it's binary compatibility changes between 6 and 6.1 already. So developers are actually waiting, probably most developers are actually waiting for version 6.2 to be released. So it will be quite some time before we actually see open source applications port to, or other non-open source applications for that matter, port to 6. To Qt version 6. Many external and unpaid contributors of Qt have also announced that they will stop working on the project. And this actually makes sense. If you're a Qt contributor, you want to see your changes and your patches be released to the open source community as open source. It doesn't make sense for again, this is for external and unpaid contributors. People that are working for other companies contributing to Qt, people that are doing it in their free time. They, of course, are saying, well, we will not work on Qt anymore, because, of course, it doesn't make sense for them. There's no return. They cannot even use probably the patches that they make themselves. So it's kind of what it is. Honestly, I think this is a dark time for Qt developers around the world, with many open source apps, not to mention the entire KDE ecosystem relying on Qt. It means that they're basically standing on top of an unsupported code base, and that's something that really it shouldn't happen. If there's a big security bug or vulnerability, or like an instability in Qt 5.15, it will not be patched. At least it will not be patched in the version that the open source community is allowed to use. This is kind of really disgusting, in my opinion. I don't know. Let's see how this situation evolves. Maybe another solution can be found, or maybe we'll just keep on standing on top of the latest open source version of Qt 5.15 until we have the possibility, like we as a community have the possibility, to porting everything to version 6. Whatever, which sadly sounds like the most probable outcome. This is the reason why one of the reasons, but probably the biggest reason why I don't like Qt. And many other projects have a similar kind of business model. They have an open source core product, but they're not really open source. Bear with me for a second. So, of course, if you have a piece of program and you have the source code to that program, it doesn't really necessarily mean that it's open source, but at least as far as I'm concerned, for all intents and purposes, it's open source. If you can copy it, redistribute it, and modify it and redistribute your changes, for me, it's basically open source. That's all I care about. But when something like this happens, it's basically a trap that they've set for the community. You learn to use this frankly awesome toolkit, because Qt is an awesome toolkit. Although I'm a GTK developer, that's just personal preference. I know, because I've used Qt, I know that it's capable of doing some amazing stuff. At the same time, I cannot endorse it. I simply cannot. And unless we're talking about like a very high profile commercial application, I cannot endorse Qt for small projects, be them proprietary or open source, because these things happen. Because the company just wakes up one day, and of course they can do that because they're a private company, they don't know anything to anyone. They can just wake up one morning and decide, well, we're going closed source. Have fun with whatever you have. And this could have happened with Qt 6 anyway. This would have meant, well, this means effectively that we have a big code base. Every open source Qt app out there, we have a big code base that's basically unsupported. It's running on the equivalent of Windows XP. I don't know. I don't really know what to say. It's frankly disgusting. I don't like the Qt company. I'm sorry for the people that invest and keep investing time and resources and their free time on top of Qt. As a platform, as an ecosystem, because this happens, and stuff like this will keep on happening because they're a private company. They're not a non-profit. They're a for-profit company. Their objective is to make money, and whatever they need to do to make money, they will. It's just how capitalism works. I don't really know what to say. I really hope that the open source community will find a solution for this, because otherwise we're in pretty deep. I cannot say a word. We're in pretty deep in the mud. Let's just leave it to that. All right, let's move on to the next news of today. GNOME 40. We have to talk about it. So GNOME 40 is coming. Whether you like it or not, it's closer than ever. It's closer than it will ever be, and it brings a lot of changes, a lot of design changes, workflow changes. It's basically gonna change again. It's gonna be a big change, similarly to how GNOME 2 to GNOME 3 was a big change. I don't think it will be as disruptive of a change, to be honest, because we're seeing in some ways at least, they're trying to be conservative in a way or another. Still, it's gonna be a disruptive experience for many of you, and myself included. And I'm typically the kind of person that likes change. I'm typically the kind of person that gets bored with the same stuff all over again and wants to see things differently. But I have some little problems with the new version of GNOME. Let's talk about this. Let's actually show you a couple of screenshots. There's not really much going on the internet, and there's not really much I can show you anyway, because the changes, they're not too deep, too heavy. At the same time, they're fundamental enough to the way that you interact with your desktop environment that they are disruptive, as small or as minimal as they may be. So let's actually look at what's going on here. This is the application view. This means that when you click on these, I cannot show you, can I? Oh well. When you click on the applications button in your dock, you will see this view. So you will see a horizontal laid out view of your installed applications, which is pretty decent. I mean, I liked the vertical orientation, but it doesn't really matter too much. I don't really use the application grid too much myself, and it's not really that big of a deal. It's gonna be horizontal instead of vertical, whatever, doesn't really matter too much. But this view here, when you go to the application grid, this is the only view where we'll be able to see an overview of your workspaces. And this is actually the first big thing. Workspaces, well, yes, they've changed. They're not vertical anymore. They're horizontal. Can make sense. I don't despise that. I don't hate it. But the overview will only be visible from the application grid. That's something that I don't like, because if I am using workspaces, and I don't always use workspaces, but when I do, I want to see all the workspaces. I want to be able to see an overview. I want to be able to see where everything is. I want to just open the overview and see, oh, here's my, I don't know, Telegram, here's Firefox, here's my Vim instance. This is not intuitive. This is something that will cause some friction if it stays like this. And of course, this is not like definitive. They're still working on it. There can be changes because GNOME 40, I don't think it's in a feature freeze yet. So there's room for changes, and I really hope they do change this. The only real thing that I would want to be able to do is pressing the super key on my keyboard, or going to the activities hot corner. That's something I do as well, and see everything in front of me. So seeing the dock as well as the workspaces, as well as my current desktop with all the applications in the current desktop, like the expose view. I don't like that I have to go to the applications grid. That's another view to open new applications to see an overview of all the open workspaces. That's something that I really don't like. Another thing that I didn't expect to not like is the positioning of the dock. And mind you, I use GNOME with dash to dock and the dock on the bottom. So when I first saw this, I thought, well, nice that they moved the dock to the bottom. That's something that I always do. It's nice that they're doing this by default now. There's one small problem. In GNOME, you only are able to access the dock when you are in the dash mode, in the overview mode. Because of dash to dock, I'm able to do this like from anywhere. I'm just put my mouse cursor at the bottom of the screen, the dock comes up. But in GNOME, like in vanilla GNOME, you have to go to the activities to see your dock. And what needs to happen for you to actually see the dock? You have to go with your mouse up here to the activities. Okay, you have to either click it or use the hot corner. So you have to let your mouse travel from whatever it is. Let's say it's in the middle. You have to travel all the way up to the top left corner. That's something that's always been like that. I don't mind it. I think it's pretty good. But then you have to go to the very bottom of the screen to open an application. You probably see where the problem lies here. You have to do 2 big mouse movements just to be able to open an application. That doesn't really work too well, in my opinion. It doesn't really feel very intuitive or very practical. When it was on the left side of the screen, you could just go to the activities, and then just from there you just move the mouse down a little bit, and you had the applications, all the entirety of your dock right on the left side. No friction, whatever. You liked it, you didn't like it, doesn't matter, because it was usable. It was very usable, in fact. With this new change, it looks much better, but it's less usable, and that's something I really don't like. Of course, this will change if they make the dock behave like a dock. This means that you can hopefully at least access the dock by just pushing the mouse down, as I am already doing with dash to dock. If they make this, if they change this and make the dock actually work like a dock, then I have no complaints. It will be pretty good. The workspaces thing, they really need to change that. And let's look at a GIF real quick, an animation of what the workflow will look like. And this is working code, I'm pretty sure. This is like GNOME 40 on the master branch right now. So if you want, you can download the latest version of GNOME OS and try that in a virtual machine to see if you like it or not, or whatever. And this is the new overview, and this is actually something that I'm pretty sure I like. The overview lets you see like the next and previous workspaces. You can drag windows to the next or previous workspace. Again, big problem, I don't see like the workspace overview. That's something that I really would miss. As far as everything else goes, it's a pretty substantial visual change, but functionality wise, apart from the workspaces again and the app grid and I think the dock, it doesn't really change too much, because the hot corner is still there, the system tray is still where it was, and the date panel, applet, whatever, in the middle of the screen, it's still there, it still behaves the same. So it's not all that disruptive, but they're making changes that don't actually make too much sense. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to say here. I I love the direction GNOME is taking, because they're thinking with design in mind, and at least previously they were thinking with usability as well in mind. And to some extent you can see some usability improvements, like the fact that you can just move applications across workspaces, because you just see like the side of the next and previous workspace when you press the button to go to the overview, but not being able to have like a general idea of where everything is something, it really bothers me. Anyway, it's too much rambling for now about GNOME 40. I think it will be a great release. Hopefully they will fix these things, because again, they're not in feature freeze yet. So hopefully they will fix what I don't like about the changes that they've made. But until then, this is just what we know so far. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I think this is gonna wrap it up for today's live stream. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please press the like button down there, and also remember to subscribe if you want more of this. Make sure to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. You will find all of the links right here, these nice QR codes, or you can go to techpills.technology/community and find all the links there. Again, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.